At 9 a.m. Washington time, a Pentagon spokesman read a report that chilled the blood of every military analyst in the room. One Iranian Navy Kilo-class submarine destroyed. 12 surface vessels eliminated. One submarine base in Bandara Bas reduced to rubble. 14 mobile coastal missile launchers wiped off the map. All before breakfast. The cost to the United States, 0 casualties, 0 ships damaged, $61 million in ammunition expended. The cost to Iran, an entire naval doctrine built over decades, dismantled in a single morning. How do you arrive at such an absolute, devastating, asymmetrical result? To understand, you have to go back exactly 18 hours, because what happened in the Strait of Hormuz wasn't a battle, it was a trap that Iran never knew existed. But before we continue, I need to ask you something. From which country and city are you watching this analysis? Because what I'm about to describe could redefine the naval balance in one of the most volatile regions on the planet. Let me know in the comments. And if this kind of content interests you, like and subscribe because here we analyze what others don't dare to explain. Let's start at the beginning. 18 hours before the confrontation, a Boeing Poseidon took off from a classified base in the Gulf region. Its mission wasn't listed in any public records. The crew began to seed the Strait of Hormuz with something the Iranians couldn't see or imagine, 140 acoustic buoys deployed in an overlapping grid covering almost 160 square kilometers of the strait. Passive buoys listened for every vibration in the water, while active buoys emitted sonar pulses. The network was so dense it could detect the hum of an electric motor kilometers away, an invisible web spun across the most contested waters on the planet. Now, let's think like the Iranian captain for a moment. He knew these waters, he had trained for years for this exact scenario. The Strait of Hormuz is shallow, acoustically complex, full of thermal layers that distort sonar, currents that confuse sensors. For a diesel-electric submarine like the Kilo class, specifically designed to operate silently, these waters should have been the perfect hiding place. And for years, Iranian doctrine was built on that premise, that geography could neutralize American technological superiority, that a silent submarine, traveling at 3 knots on the thermocline at a depth of 115 meters, would be virtually invisible. That premise was about to collapse in the most brutal way possible. At 0214 hours, the sensors picked up the first acoustic signature. A faint contact, diesel-electric, heading 112, speed 3 knots, depth 116 meters, riding precisely on the thermocline, trying to hide in the ocean's natural acoustic shadow. The data traveled instantly to the Combat Information Center of the USS Gerald R. Ford. And this is where the story takes a turn the Iranian captain never imagined. The Ford isn't simply an aircraft carrier, it's a $13 billion floating combat network. Its Combat Command Center processes more tactical data in 60 seconds than the entire Iranian Navy handles in a week. Every ship in the strike group knew at that instant exactly where the Iranian submarine was, its depth, its speed, its heading, every revolution of its propeller shaft, every hum of its electric motor. For hours, the Ford's passive sonar suite listened to the acoustic signature of that kilogram, like someone listening to the breathing of a sleeping person in the next room. The Iranian captain believed he was the hunter. He had no way of knowing that for hours he had been the prey. At 0322, 2 MH-60 RC Hawk helicopters took off from the destroyer USS McFall. Each carried 4 Mark 54 torpedoes and a deployable sonar that the Iranian submarine couldn't evade. They positioned themselves in absolute silence, with no electromagnetic emissions, no radio transmissions. 2 Predators hovered above their target, waiting with lethal patience. The trap was set. All that was left was for Iran to activate it. And here's where I pose the first strategic question. Do you think the Iranian Naval Command knew the true risk of sending those 38 men, or had their doctrine convinced them that the geography would protect them? At 0347, the Iranian captain made the decision that would seal his fate and that of his country's entire naval force in the strait. He gave the order to fire. 2 heavy torpedoes were launched from their tubes, and here's a technical detail that many don't know. Firing a torpedo is not silent. The compressed air ejection generates an acoustic transient that travels through the water at more than 1,000 meters per second. For every American hydrophone within a 37-kilometer radius, that sound was like a cannon shot inside a cathedral. 2 torpedoes, heading 094, range 10,500 m, closing speed 40 knots. The Ford's crew had 43 seconds before impact. They didn't need even half that time. In 4 seconds, the SLQ-25C NXI acoustic decoy was deployed from the carrier's stern. This towed device precisely replicates the acoustic signature of the ship's propellers. It emits a false target so convincing that a torpedo's guidance system cannot distinguish it from the real one. The first Iranian torpedo engaged the Nixie. It chased a Phantom. It passed within 275 m of the Ford's hull, ran out of fuel, and plunged into the abyss. The second torpedo detected 2 targets and chose the loudest one, the decoy. Both torpedoes disappeared into the depths without touching a single American sailor. The Iranian captain had fired his best shot against the most powerful warship ever built and had missed. Now came the response. 91 seconds. That was all that transpired between the Iranian launch and the U.S. authorization to fire. The rules of engagement left no room for ambiguity. An unprovoked torpedo attack against a U.S. aircraft carrier constitutes an act of war. The response would be overwhelming. The 2 Seahawks had been operating for 26 minutes with their scalable sonars set to the kilogram. The firing solution was precise to the meter. Exact depth, exact speed, exact heading. 4 torpedoes. Mark 54. They entered the water simultaneously. Their active acoustic seekers emit 37,000 pulses per second. Closing speed, 40 knots. The Iranian submarine's maximum sprint speed, 17 knots. The math doesn't compromise. Inside the submarine, they detected the incoming torpedoes 22 seconds before impact. Emergency blowout, maximum speed, evasive maneuvers, everything in order. None of it mattered. The first Mark 54 torpedo struck the engine room at 0349. 20 kilograms of high explosive detonated against a pressurized hull already withstanding the pressure of 116 meters of water. A 5-meter breach opened. Water poured in at a rate of over 300,000 liters per minute. The second torpedo arrived 9 seconds later. The Kilo-class submarine imploded at a depth of 128 meters. 38 crew members were lost instantly. The total engagement time was 2 minutes and 41 seconds. But the strike group wasn't over because that submarine wasn't acting alone. Was Iran's decision to attack a desperate move or a monumental strategic miscalculation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because what comes next takes this crisis to another level. For the 3 hours prior to the submarine attack, the maritime patrol aircraft had been tracking secondary contacts. 12 Iranian warships had left Bandar Bas 6 hours earlier under the guise of a routine patrol. Classic asymmetric doctrine. The submarine strikes first. It draws attention into the depths, while the surface force closes the distance, reaching missile launch range. In theory, a lethal pincer movement, but that theory had a fatal flaw. The Americans had been monitoring each of those ships since the moment they cast off in port. Every maneuver recorded, every course change catalogued, every radio transmission intercepted. At 0412, the USS Delver D. Black's AEGX combat system obtained simultaneous fire solutions on all 12 contacts. What followed was surgical execution. 24 SM-6 missiles were launched from the vertical launch cells. Dual-mode seekers, each missile assigned to an individual target. The Iranian ships had no warning, no time to maneuver, no time to launch a single missile. In 67 seconds, the entire Iranian naval force deployed in the Strait of Hormuz ceased to exist, and the Gerald R. Ford didn't alter its course by a single degree, nor change its speed by a single knot. The most advanced aircraft carrier in the world continued its transit as if 2 torpedoes and 12 enemy ships had been a minor administrative inconvenience. That indifference was in itself a strategic message, but the operation didn't end at sea. 4 hours later, Tomahawk missiles, launched from 3 destroyers, began impacting the Iranian submarine base at Bandara Bas Tomahawk in a time-coordinated salvo. The docks, maintenance facilities, and command center were all reduced to smoldering rubble before dawn. Then came the air phase. At 6:15 a.m. 4 A-18E Super Hornets took off from the Ford's flight deck. Their mission: to hunt down every mobile missile launcher that Iran had positioned along the southern shore of the strait. The Pachoa Poseidon aircraft had been tracking those vehicles, fixed coordinates, and loaded attack packages for 18 hours before the planes left the catapult. The Iranian commanders had scattered their launchers among fishing villages and coastal roads, betting that the American rules of engagement would waver near civilian areas. They were wrong. Every launcher that had fired at American ships lost that protection the instant it released a weapon. The Super Hornets worked methodically. AGM-65 Maverick missiles. Precision hits. One by one. The launch platforms that Iran had spent years positioning along the northern shore of the strait were reduced to burning scrap metal. By 7:30 a.m. the coastal missile belt on which Iranian naval doctrine had depended for 3 decades was gone. Think about it for a moment. Iran had invested decades building its asymmetric strategy. The Kilo submarines they called their silent shield, the fast attack craft they called their swarm, the coastal missile batteries they called their iron fist, all designed around a fundamental conviction that geography, numbers, and sacrifice could neutralize America's technological superiority in the strait's bottleneck. In a single morning, the U.S. Navy dismantled that strategic architecture piece by piece. Does this represent the definitive end of Iran's asymmetric doctrine, or will it push Tehran toward even more dangerous options? That is a question that should concern us all. In Tehran, the silence in the Naval Command Center was absolute. Admirals who had dedicated entire careers to perfecting asymmetric warfare stared at screens showing empty ocean where, hours before, a fleet had stood. Everything they had built, everything they had believed in, was gone before breakfast. The Gerald R. Ford resumed normal flight operations at 6:30 a.m. The crew ate breakfast at the usual time. The engagement was recorded, transmitted, and archived. For a strike group handling more tactical complexity before dawn than most of the world's navies manage in a year. This was just a Tuesday. Global oil markets surged with the first news of the torpedo attack. By midday, they were stabilizing because the ships were still moving, because the Ford was still sailing, because the Strait of Hormuz was still open. And somewhere in those waters, 128 meters below the surface, 38 men lie inside a crushed steel cylinder. Sailors who followed orders into a trap so complete, so silent, so inevitable, that they never understood what had happened to them. There is a lesson written in the darkness at the bottom of the strait, where Iran's most dangerous submarine believed it was invisible. It never was, not for a single second. And that is perhaps the most chilling truth of this engagement. It wasn't a battle, it was a demonstration of what happens when a nation confuses audacity with capability, when doctrine replaces realistic analysis, when a blow is struck without understanding that the adversary has been waiting for hours for that exact move. Do you think this show of force will deter Iran, or will the humiliation push them to seek retaliation through even more unpredictable means? Let me know in the comments. And tell me also where in the world you're following this analysis from, because these waters affect us all, from fuel prices to the global geopolitical balance. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just any channel. Here, we dissect the military and geopolitical scenarios that define the world we live in. Subscribe so you don't miss the next analysis. Like this video if it gave you a perspective you didn't find elsewhere, and share it with someone who needs to understand what's really at stake in the Strait of Hormuz, because the next move is already brewing, and when it happens, we'll be the first to analyze it. No.